Hello, I'm Bill Russell, President of Lake Norman Chamber of Commerce, and you're watching the Focus Friday, and we're very excited to have Linda Cheek on board, but Rhonda Cheek, Linda Cheek, Rhonda Cheek.
You need more coffee.
Our presenting sponsor is Novant Health, and Novant is not going to be able to join us there in meetings today, but Deepa Johnson had a statement. She wanted to wish everybody from Novant Health Huntersville Medical Center a happy holiday season and New Year. Thank you for all your support these last 2 years during the pandemic, and we look forward to continuing to work with all of you in 2022. Again, we thank Novant Health for being our presenting sponsor. Linda Cheek is one of my chamber execs that I work with, and I guess I had that on my brain. But our program today is going to be emceed by Jeff Tarte. He is our public policy chair. And I would love to introduce Rhonda, but you probably have a lot of things that you want to say. So I'll turn it over to you, Jeff.
Actually, I'm going to keep it relatively brief just because we've got a lot of material to cover this morning and pretty serious topics. Rhonda and I, I guess, full disclosure, have known each other for at least 25 years. Our kids have gone to school together, been involved with CMS back from when she started Fume. That whole organization getting involved. So she's been very active with CMS for virtually, I think, since early childhood of her own. Ron, I'm going to actually ask you, not so much your personal background. A lot of people don't know you're a nurse and have a healthcare and medical background, but really would love you to share your involvement first with CMS over the years and the nature of things you've done, even for, the things in the classroom that people don't realize we all do as parents involved with our kids going through school, and yours have been there. Again, we're very fortunate that you represent us on the school board and the Board of Education, a voice of sanity for all of us up here. And with all that's going on, again, really blessed that you're willing to do this. I know in the day now that we've gone into social media, it is a rather strange environment to find yourself as an elected official. You've got people who love you, and then you've got the haters out there that constantly go at people that are in elected office in some way over the line. I know you've dealt with a lot of that, and we appreciate you tolerating the silliness that exists out there. And you continue to serve us so well here and immersed in the issues. And I know you'll be able to hopefully give us a little background on your involvement with CMS, and then floor is yours for a while to really just update us what's going on. CMS has been in the paper the last few days with the Observer, and we know there's a lot of issues going on that you're right in the middle of making decisions and helping guide us through this. So with that, I'm going to give you the floor. And Rhonda, again, thank you for being here and joining us today.
Well, thank you. CMS is dear to my heart. I am a South Met grad, 1979, actually. My daughters, I stayed in Charlotte. I am a nurse. I went to Central Piedmont, did the non-traditional route, did a community college degree, and then went back to UNCC and have a degree in business. So I've done a lot of different healthcare jobs, from medical sales to currently I'm a workers' comp case manager, which is a great flexible job, and I enjoy it a lot, working with people. My 3 children all graduated from CMS. The first time I met Jeff Tarte, he and I were co-room parents for our first grade daughters. And I was a room mom and did all that kind of stuff. PTA boards at David Cox, Bradley Middle, Huntersville Elementary, North Mech. Got a little feisty about almost 20 years ago when we came out of court-ordered busing and there wasn't enough buildings for the kids that lived in this area. And I started a little group called Fume, Families United for the N was silent, North Mecklenburg Education. And we lobbied hard to get schools built, and some of the fruits of those labors. And Mr. Russell, he remembers riding downtown in my minivan. I coerced him to come and speak at a school board meeting wearing yellow shirts. And we have JV Washam to thank for that. We have Huff High School. We have Grand Oak Elementary. We have Barnett Elementary. There's so many schools that were built as a result of the advocacy of the community rising up with me and with me in that time. And then kind of that led me to be PTA Volunteer of the Year back in the day, and a lot of other things. And then I ended up in 09. I lost my first race in 05 and ended up in 09 representing District 1. My term should have expired on Tuesday. And because of the pandemic and census delays, my term has been extended for another year, and not ready to make an announcement yet about moving forward, but I am leaning pretty hard about trying to continue my service because I feel there's still a lot of work for me to do. So that's kind of where I am. And to say that it's been a tumultuous 20 months, it would be an understatement. The last 20 days have been even more chaotic. So I'm ready to field a bunch of questions. We've been in the news every day, and that's never where you want to be when you're an elected official.
Rhonda, why don't you start before we kind of jump into the question sections? Is just give us a little update, what's been going on, discussions with the board, with the issues that are on the table right now. What are the kind of hot topics you're dealing with that we're all aware? And then we'll get into kind of a little more specifics around some of these things I know you're going to mention.
For me, the two big topics are coming out of the pandemic. We have lost all the academic gains we've made over the last few years. Our academic numbers are horrible, especially in our Black and Brown populations. But across the board, students lost academically during the pandemic. Virtual education is a blessing for some children, and some children do thrive in it, but the vast majority have not done well. And my advocacy to get us back in the classroom August of 2020 was not successful. And so we didn't get back in the classroom till January of last year or this year. So academics we're struggling, and we were already really working hard to try to make gains, but we have to catch back up. And then the other issue, I believe that students have suffered a lot of mental and social trauma from the pandemic. Some of them, I think one of the biggest problems is kids being out of school. They lost those connections with those teachers and coaches and those mentors that really do help shepherd them and help them with decision making and making good choices. And we have a lot of children that are suffering in our area that have been suffering mental situations. We've got a lot of kids with depression. We've had a higher rate of suicide in students. And then in other parts of our city, we're seeing we're seeing a huge influx of violence in the communities. And that violence in the communities has spilled over into our schools on an almost daily basis.
Can you, to kind of set the stage, take us first a little bit about your thought process and your decision-making process and sources of information when a matter comes that's a board level issue. How do you go about doing your homework for a particular issue?
Oh gosh, I have a network of folks. Many of them are on this call, but I was on the phone last night with somebody from the Mallard Creek area. I talked to parents. I talked to teachers. I talk to physicians that I know. I work with a lot of doctors, so I get a lot of my medical stuff. I don't get it off of Google and Facebook. I get it from actual doctors. And I talk to business leaders.
Bad precedent. Stop that.
I know. I try not to get my medical knowledge off of Dr. Facebook. I'm out in the community every day. The one unique thing about my job is that when everybody went remote in March 13th or 15th of 2020, I did not. I worked every day. I did not have a break. And so I was still out there seeing the real reality of COVID, but also seeing the reality of what was happening to kids and the struggles that nurses and healthcare workers and other people had trying to patch things together to give their kids the best quality of education possible in remote settings. So, I mean, my network is pretty big. I've lived in Mecklenburg County since 1978. I know a lot of people, and I am not a shy person, and I'm pretty well connected. And so I talk to a lot of people. I try to not have a narrow circle of input. I may have a narrow circle of advisors, but I try to have a wide net of input.
So shifting a little bit from your kind of individual processes and looking at the board itself. And I guess I would say first, I think most elected officials, including all the members on the Board of Education, are people who care enough to give of their time and serve. I know, the collective social perspective we get sometimes is, crazies on all of that, but that's really not the very vast majority of people who are willing to give of their time. And that's clearly not the case on the Board of Education, but you've got a very wide, divergent set of views and backgrounds, and that usually adds to good decision making and in relationships. But can you share a little bit about perhaps kind of the dynamics of working on with that particular group and board, and how you guys go about making, again, I guess, decisions and setting directions and the roles and so forth of the board?
So it's changed a lot since I started. When I was first started on the board, almost all of us had full-time jobs, and we had a lot of guys on the board then too. We were much more balanced kind of mix. We right now have 8 females, 1 male, and only 2 of us have full-time jobs outside of our volunteer time. So that kind of creates an unusual dynamic. Also, one of 2 conservatives. There's a 1 independent that's fairly conservative as well. So it's a very different mix of people. But there's a few core issues that we all coalesce around. And some of my closest advisors or closest contacts on the board are people you would not expect, like Dr. Ruby Jones and I. We speak all the time. She's got a vast history and a pedagogy that's just crazy in education. Her knowledge is decades and decades of work within the schools and in the community. So I would say that I'll give you an example. Superintendent staff had a recommendation Charlie, you may get me wrong on the dates here. I think it was January. It would have been January because I was taking my son back to college. It was January that we were not going to restart sports. We were going to keep kids out of sports, which would then mean sacrificing basketball and almost all the winter and spring sports. And as a sports mom, and that not just for the sport, but for the knowledge of what kids were missing already without those connections during the day, that knowing that kids that are involved in sports have the mentorship and just the close connections with their coaches, I really felt that was a bad idea. And I spent 36 hours lobbying every one of my colleagues to reverse that decision, to tell the superintendent, no, we do not support you. I literally was standing in a doctor's office when I got a call from the chair that she said, I'm with you. And I knew she was my 5th vote. And this is the number 5. I got to have 5 to do anything. And when the board chair called and she said, I'm with you, I literally started to cry. I had to go in the bathroom of this doctor's office, and I had tears in my eyes because I realized we were going to put kids back in the swimming pool and on the basketball courts, and we were going to do something that kids really needed. And at the core of everything I do, it's what do kids really need? And so that was just an all-out lobbying effort for 36 straight hours. Mr. Jeter's aware of it. And we ended up with, I think, 8 people. And so the announcement was kind of made, and I said, Mr. Superintendent, I don't agree with this, and I think some of my colleagues are with me. And I asked my colleagues to do a roll call, something was very uncommon. And because it was not a vote, it was a show of non-support of the direction. So we went around the room one at a time, and everybody piped up and said, no, I support us going back. I support us going back. Coolest moment ever is Huff ended up winning the swimming and diving state championship. And I got a text from the coach or from the athletic director from the pool in Raleigh or wherever they were with a picture of them. And I mean, and they were jumping up and down, and they all had a little sign that said, thank you, Mrs. Cheek. And they didn't have to do that, but it was just such a representation of how we have to do things. So sometimes it takes just gritting it out for 36 hours and talking people into your position.
I like it. Well, you brought it up, so we're going to jump right in to the pandemic issues a little bit. With Omicron starting to rear its head and being very prevalent in the projections and predictions that it will start escalating. Can you give us a little bit of inside baseball and how you guys get updated on COVID and what you're hearing from a school perspective, how Omicron may or may not impact you? And then kind of the corollary questions. I'd love to know what the board collectively, you can share your individual opinion, but I'm really looking collectively at the board directionally. What are they thinking in terms of vaccines mandates? What are they thinking in terms of the mask mandate? And then we'll get into kind of the learning loss in a little bit here.
So Omicron is coming. I don't even think it's Omicron right now, but I have seen a uptick in my work with patients with COVID over the last 2 weeks. And if things have been settled down, the hospitals that I mostly interact with are seeing an uptick. So that's discouraging. Iredell Statesville has announced mask mandate policy started when they come back from Christmas. We are still under mask mandate because the county of Mecklenburg is still under a mask mandate. I've had a lot of people say, do you think you'll go to remote? I honestly, this is me. And I think I read the tea leaves of my colleagues pretty well. There's a couple people that are very, very, very anxious about COVID always and have been, but the vast majority have seen the need for in-person education and the benefits to students' academic success. So I do not see us going to remote. I see spotting remote things. If you get a big outbreak, particularly, we do have that some flexibility there if we have to. So mask mandate, until the Mecklenburg County releases their mask mandate, I don't think it's something that we're not going to go against that. Me personally, I voted against continuing masks the other night, or the question the other night, simply because we still don't even have a clear set of parameters of how we would come out of masks. I just want us to have some numbers that say, if this happens, and this happens, we'll come out of masks. Now we're kind of talking about staying in. My board as a whole is probably a lot more COVID concerned than, and I don't want to say that I'm not maybe COVID cautious than I am. I'm not a throw caution to the wind, but I also, understand you don't have to wear a mask outside and that sort of thing. I am fully vaccinated and boosted, and it's something that I believe in because of my healthcare background. That said, I am not a vax mandate person. I do respect people's individual rights. Hey, back in H1N1 a decade ago at the hospital, if you didn't get the H1N1 shot that had just been developed, you had to wear the big giant OSHA headgear, which is now kind of standard practice for everybody. But and I chickened out and didn't want to wear that headgear because I'm a little claustrophobic. So, but I am not going to tell teachers they have to have vaccines because I think people do have individual choices and rights. So I do stand in an unusual situation there, maybe for a healthcare worker. I do, like I said, my personal choice and all my immediate family is vaccinated.
Ms. Cheek, I would like to add, you touched on this. I do think it's important we live under different laws today than we did for last school year. In August of this year, the General Assembly passed into law and the governor signed it into law, North Carolina Session Law 221-130. That law prohibits full district-wide mandated remote learning. That is no longer a legal option for any school district in North Carolina. We really only have 3 virtual options now. One is voluntary remote, where parents want to opt in. The second is inclement weather remote. So if we have a snowstorm or something like that, or we have a power outage or something like that, you can go remote for up to 5 total days under that circumstance. The last is if you have COVID outbreaks at a school by school basis, yep, you can go to remote, but you have to reaffirm that decision every single day. Yep. So the concept of going back to a full remote district wide, that's no longer permissible under North Carolina law.
And just for people who may be watching and aren't necessarily members of the chamber as they're looking at this, this is Charlie Jeter for the 3 people in North Carolina who don't know Charlie. Charlie's former 5th ranking member of the House of Representatives for the state of North Carolina, and I believe is the head of government affairs for the Charlotte-Mecklenburg school system. So an expert on all things legislative as it impacts schools and education in our state. And we asked Charlie to join because we know we'd be getting into some topics he would be expert on some details. So Charlie, appreciate you chiming in, and do that as you feel appropriate to add detail. But Rhonda, anything further on that you wanted to add?
No, I mean, that's the bottom line. We had to go remote for one particular school for 2 classes this week because of an outbreak. So, it is something that we have that in those instances. I know I've gotten a little bit of heat from a neighboring district, not near me, but on the other side of the county, that is going to throw away, or they're going to disregard quarantine and all those types of things. We're not there. I mean, they can do their thing, but I'm not there. I've been a nurse for too long to say that quarantine does not have a value.
Of course. I guess jumping into it, because it's related, is we've personally talked a little bit and we've read about the concept of learning loss. To what extent do you see it having an impact? How real is it relative to learning loss of students being out of school in a virtual environment for the first time, particularly at the younger ages? Can you elaborate on that for us? Share what you think.
I think it's devastating. Especially K2, when reading fundamentals are being taught. It's really, high school kids, I don't think that they missed a beat quite the same. College, they're used to working more in a virtual world and much more self-directed. But the fundamentals of reading, the science of reading, is something that professionals teach, and moms and dads and grandparents and daycares and all these places that kids went during the virtual. That is not their subject matter expertise, and kids suffered. We may not see the full impact of that. It may continue to play out for the next couple of years, because a child that was a kindergarten when the pandemic hit 2020, they're not going to be doing their third grade reading assessments for another couple of years, and so we hopefully can reverse as much of that as possible. That's the other benefit, is young minds are the most pliable, and the more intensive work we do on things like the science of reading. And I focus a lot on reading, but everything hinges from that, even math.
Sure.
You have to be able to read to do everything else, all the other subjects.
So has there been discussion at the board level or at principals level on how we're going to catch kids up at the younger ages?
There has. My biggest beef right now is that there hasn't been like a definitive plan put out to the public to show them exactly the steps that are being taken. But I'm telling you, when I'm talking to my teachers, they're just working it. They're teaching the science of reading hardcore, and they're just being very intensive and very intentional with kids. It's not very glamorous. It's
Sure.
just doing the work.
Does virtual have a role in this, in terms of, is virtual a good thing, bad thing, or just a thing?
It's a thing. I think for some kids, it's great. You've got some kids that thrive in that environment. I do think for older kids, there's a lot of benefit to virtual. You've got some kids maybe that have a very specialized education or curriculum focus, and there's not enough kids at their school maybe that offer Latin or something like that. In those situations, virtual is awesome because it can expand their academic offerings. There are kids that do virtual K-12. I mean, there's an NC virtual K-12 school that's a charter. I'm not seeing, what I've seen from the academic results is that is not the best way probably to teach kids how to read, the science of reading.
Gotcha. In terms of catching up, are there discussions of alternatives in terms of, and there's legislative, legal issues around some of these things. School calendars obviously being one we've been trying to wrestle for years, but in terms of extending the days, going to year round, any of those kinds of options being discussed or bantered?
Well, as you know, we had Camp CMS last year, which was basically, it was supposed to be kind of like a summer school, but we called it Camp CMS. So a lot of kids thought they would probably have swimming and craft time, and it was really a lot of summer school. And so a lot of kids didn't come back after the first couple weeks. So we did have that option. I think we'll have an option to do some summer catch up type stuff. We're working with outside agencies on a lot of reading recovery. And we do have you might get me, but I think we've got an RFP out there for out of school time to work on tutoring services outside of the school day for students that have lagged behind. So we know that we need to have tutoring or outside the day intervention with kids.
All right, let's jump.
Kind of a myriad of things.
We've kind of eased up to this one, but the tough topic of the day, and really came into focus again, is the Michigan school shooting. And most recently, the reporting on the number of firearms that are being reported and found in CMS schools. And I guess it's a good thing they're being found rather than used primarily. But can you give us we'll start maybe with just giving you the floor for a second. And what are the conversations that you all are having around firearms and weapons and shootings in school and active shooters and those kinds of conversations? Then we'll jump into a little more specific.
Well, I mean, it's been a topic that's constantly been in the news this year, but it's been something that's been, I've heard about for years and decades. There's two things that are going on right now. Number one is we got to make sure that the children that are in our schools to learn, the 99.9% of those kids that are there for the right reasons to gain academic excellence are in a safe environment. The second part is we've got a small segment of our kids that simply cannot conform to the rules. They're in violent situations in our community, and that's spilling into our schools. We have to figure out how to identify those kids, how to reduce their impact, and then figure out what the best course of action for those students are. Is my opinion that not every student benefits from a large comprehensive high school, that there are some kids that have behavioral issues and social issues that lend themselves to behavior modification programs and violence is preventable type programs that are offered in smaller settings. And perhaps we're best serving those students in that way. I can't say that all my board members agree with that because we think differently, but my main goal is to protect and make it as safe as possible for those kids that are there for the correct reasons and the staff that's teaching them.
Gotcha. I'm going to come back to, and I want to be careful with, labeling, but, the problem kids, the serious kids that create serious problems. But starting, any sense or any conversation of why you think we're, collectively, not you individually, but collectively, why we think we're seeing an uptick in prevalence of firearms in schools again?
Well, I think that we're seeing an uptick of violence and firearm use in the community. And we are just an arm of the community. I think that's the number one thing. I think, when our society said stay home in March of 2020, kids that didn't have a lot of guidance and support in their lives before that day didn't gain any, and left on their own, as all of us who are parents, if you leave a bunch of kids alone together, they're probably going to come up with some things that aren't such great ideas, and they're not being necessarily guided and given guidance by people that have great ideas. And so it's like a storm. It's like a storm of negative consequences. A lot of kids learn you've got kids, this is the number that gets me. We got kids that went home March of 2020 that were 7th graders. A lot of them, almost all of those kids, were seeing that they chose to stay virtual the whole year last year for whatever reason. So we have kids that left as a 7th grader and came back August of 2021 as a freshman in high school, which we all know that transition from middle to high school is so critical. Then you have kids that for a year and a half have had a lot of not structured guidance to take them to that place. So those kids, the 14 and 15-year-olds in our high schools right now, we're struggling with them making really bad choices.
A question for you, Rhonda, but if Charlie, in case you know more detail, just for everybody that's watching along, what actually happens to a student who's caught with a firearm on school property, and what happens to that weapon, just out of curiosity?
Okay, well, so the first thing that happens is it's a dual path. There is a public schools in North Carolina have a state statute. Charlie can quote it later because he's the statute quoter. But we have, it's called Rule 31. Bringing a weapon to school is grounds for expulsion. Expulsion doesn't mean you get suspended. Expulsion means you are done with your academic experience in a North Carolina funded public school, be it charter or public. You can't go to Cabarrus. You can't go anywhere.
On the first occurrence, or is it like third
any
time,
occurrence? The first occurrence. Second, simultaneous. So the process begins for your expulsion and loss of your academic opportunities in public schools in North Carolina. That doesn't mean you couldn't go to a private school, but public schools. Second path happens is the local police are contacted. In pretty much every instance that I'm aware of, you are charged with possession of a firearm on school property, which is a felony, and your gun is confiscated by the local police. So, so the local police authorities of that school, not necessarily where the child might live. So we have, Huntersville PD has had to arrest some kids. So they're on two paths. They're losing their academic opportunities for public education in North Carolina. Simultaneously, they're now in the criminal justice system if they were not already.
So with that, and the uptick, and we've heard different actions and being taken by the school system. What are the options that have been discussed? What are the directions? We've seen, we're going to be spending almost $500,000 on clear book bags. I've read mixed reviews where other school systems have tried that unsuccessfully. Thoughts behind the rationale of supporting that, and then just what other things are you guys doing? I guess the public's going to want to know for sure.
100%.
We're reading it all. We're reading it in the Observer, and the Observer is not reporting what's going on.
So back in August, when some of the shootings happened in the community that were loosely connected, but never really directly connected to the schools, there was a pretty big outcry about making sure things were safer. So I think there were some ideas that started being investigated at that point. And then as a weekly occurrence of us seeing more and more handguns, I think one every 3 days is kind of the number we're having like right now. Some things were brought up. Clear backpacks was one of them. Metal detectors or some type of incoming screening device was discussed. Increasing the number of campus security associates is something that all of the principals of high schools I'm talking about or talking to are wanting more campus security folks, although we know the employment issues right now and finding good people, that might be a bit of a challenge to find those positions. Other ideas have bubbled up as well. So the clear backpacks did come up. I think this is how I look at clear backpacks. They could be a piece of the puzzle. We've ordered them. They are not the panacea. I know the school down in Florida that had the shootings. I can't remember the name of it. Charlie, you're going to remember because you had a connection.
Douglas.
Yes.
Yeah, Parkland.
So they did it and then they stopped. I think anybody that's been to a local sporting or a sporting event knows that you have to take a clear backpack and walk through those scanners, whether that be at high school, middle school, or high school, college, or professional. And so I think the clear backpacks were thought of as a piece of that. They've kind of gotten reported and kind of taken a life of their own as there's nobody that I am aware of that thinks that that's the panacea that's going to solve the gun problem in Mecklenburg County or anywhere else. But my understanding is we are working very closely with the supplier of the scanners from Bank of America Stadium. We have proposals for the cost. Each machine can scan 3,500 people in an hour if they are carrying a clear book bag or clear bag.
And that was one of the recommendations former Chief Putney had recommended, correct?
Correct. Yes. Actually, he said metal detectors. These are a little bit more than a metal detector. They're kind of the next generation. So I know what the cost of those is. Could we use COVID money for that? Probably so, because there's they're hands-free and there's some COVID friendly aspects of that could be loosely connected. I've got a big group of people saying, please don't do that. It makes our schools feel like you're going into prison. But I don't feel like I'm going to prison when I go to a Panther game. I do feel safer when I go to a Panther game because I know I've walked through that, and so is everybody sitting around me. So I think the clear backpacks are a way to enhance that. And I think that hasn't been, I will say that the staff's communication on that has been poor. Has been awful actually. And Charlie's like cringing right now that I said the word awful. But it's been awful. And it should have been portrayed that part of the reason we want the clear backpacks is so when we do screen kids coming into a building, it makes that process go fast. Is it going to solve everything? No. I had people go, kids are going to bring their guns in their musical instrument bags. I just want people to think about that and internalize that for a minute. There's not been a single child that has bought a weapon to school this year that was in the band. So I know band kids. That could be an issue, but that's really that's kind of a reach. Is it the panacea? 100% no. There is not a single thing. Even Kurt Putney will tell you that even with metal detectors or some kind of screening devices, weapons can still get into buildings.
Sure. Without, I guess not sharing too many details that we're not supposed to know, but how prepared and comfortable are you that CMS is prepared for an active shooter situation.
Actually
And
very comfortable. I participated in one of the trainings. The trainings are done throughout the system. At any given moment, I went through this even in the hospital. Gosh, it just kind of takes my breath away to think about it. But I think that we're as prepared as you could possibly be, knowing that if something like that does happen, even all training sometimes flies out the window. You try to do your best, but it's not something that we daily train on because we're not trying to create that environment. But I think we are, the processes and systems are in place for that. Is it going to run? If God forbid that happens, I'm sure it won't be perfect.
gotcha.
The response.
I'm going to jump back to a topic you kind of referenced, and that's identifying the problem kids. I had been to all the CMS high schools over time and a lot of the schools. One of the things a message I heard from the counselors, the few clinical counselors that we have, and even a number of principals, they pretty much can identify what they called, term to me, whether this is a fair term, but the frequent flyers. Yep. The kids who are, the 3 or 4 kids in a school that are just a recurring behavioral problem. And I don't mean, they stand up and back talk to teacher. These are kids that have, some of them even have felony backgrounds already and criminal records. What, if anything, are we doing around those kids that are most likely? Because whether this is fair or not, this is a very tough topic to go down. And there's different research I've read on it, and that's the P word, which is profiling in particular. And that's when you label a kid a frequent flyer and a problem and a potential target. But one of the things the experts that we had present in the legislature when I was there is there's a set of attributes that are pretty common, not 100%, but it's in the 70-80% range of the kids who commit shootings in school. They tend to be white. They tend to be in the late teens, early 20s even, and coming back. They had problems in school. They were bullied or do bully kids. They have rigorous social media postings that are, you get a proclivity that they're inclined to this kind of stuff. They have a criminal record background, not criminal, but they have a background. The police are familiar with them and who they are. They have typically drugs, both legal, not just illegal, but legal issues with drugs, broken families. I mean, it's not a single set of characteristics. It's a number. Is it apply to everybody? Absolutely not. But are we trying to identify? And again, the issue seems to be one of the attributes was then getting these kids. It's not then pulling them out and locking them in a closet somewhere. These are the kids that need their arms put around, need a hug, need love, need talked about, cared for, but catching them early from the behavioral health and mental health issues, because they've got issues. A lot of the times we know who they are. What, if anything, are we doing in that area?
Well, one of the things we've done is we've greatly increased our social emotional staff at our schools, the school psychologist, the safety, the screenings. One of the big issues we have is suicide. So there's a hardcore suicide risk assessment program that's going on in our schools right now. I cannot tell you how many Huff has done. When I heard the number, it was staggering. Dozens of them, dozens. I will tell you I don't think the profile of our people that have brought guns on campus very well matched the description that you had. Is a little different today. And at least what we're seeing of people bringing guns to campus, that doesn't mean they, then why are they bringing guns to campus? Are they bringing them for protection? Are they bringing them for intimidation? All that kind of factors in. I will tell you that one of the things that, thank you to Heather Colm from Hopewell High School, who really pushed this hard. We are now participating with the Sandy Hook Foundation's Say Something app. It'll be rolling out district-wide when the kids come back to school. All the training is happening with staff on it now. It's going to roll out, I think, Charles, is it middle and high schools? Right. Middle and high. The Say Something app, it was developed, it's been done in other parts of our state. We're one of the two big, Wake and Mech didn't do it, and now we're doing it. The app has 3 main components. One is suicide. You can turn in suicide risk. report somebody anonymously, you can report anonymously a sexual harassment or sexual assault situation. And you can report a threat or weapon or behavioral issue of a student anonymously. And then what's work being done right now is to get the cascade of all the people that get notified when that app is triggered at that school. So giving students a chance for an anonymous reporting system is a huge deterrent for all those things I just mentioned, because we're also seeing a lot more of those other issues. As far as targeting or profiling, yes, if you talk to any principal right now, she knows or he knows the kids that are being disruptive and causing the biggest problems. My thing that I've said to my principals and some of the school leadership is, I want to intervene on those kids before they become the student we expel that loses their opportunity for any public education. That is when we have to just dismiss them. And I don't want that to happen. We've got 23 right now that are going to have that happen, actually more than 23. So what do we do? So we've got a lot of restorative justice programs. We've got a lot of intervention programs. We've got the Turning Point Academy. Are we perfect? Absolutely not. Are we catching every one of them? Absolutely not. We're doing some programs and some restorative work. There's a lot of community organizations that want to help us. We've got to do better, because the preventative side of this is what saves kids.
Sure. It's kind of tangential. I'm going to take a little bit of a left turn, but it's in the same topic area. A lot of the kids bringing firearms, as they talk about, because they're in disputes, fighting, being bullied and that sort of
Selling
thing.
drugs. Selling drugs.
Well, we'll come back to drugs if we get time. We got a long list. We're going to have you back next month. You'll just be the continuing
My breakfast, Friday breakfast.
Yeah. The dispute resolution. Is there training or exposure to that? I guess one, obviously the natural one would be teachers or SROs, but more so. And also, so I guess that's one I'd love you to share, but also, is anything done for the students?
Oh, students we're trying to work on that with our social emotional curriculum pieces. And there's parts of that I don't agree with, because I think they go on another tangent, but this piece, they do talk about how to handle things. An interesting thing that Hopewell just started after they've had some issues this year, they started what's called a Zen room, Z-E-N. It's a room where students can go to calm down and de-escalate their anxiety or their situation. And students have responded really favorably to have a place where they can just go and have some support and just get out of the situation. So we're working on that. Yes, there are also behavior mod technicians, BMTs, at our schools that are trained. Teachers are trained in de-escalation really from the time that they're in elementary school age.
Really?
It's unfortunate that teachers can't just focus on the science of reading, that they have to focus on all the other social, emotional, and behavioral things. But in the absence of that coming from other places, we are trying to provide it. Are we doing a great job? No. I mean, are our teachers doing their best? I think most of them are. We need the support. We got to have, and one of the things is that the dissolution of family units and community support during COVID has been just significant in that.
So here's a question. Since you brought up the drugs issue, what is the school system doing about removing drugs from schools? I get different attitudes from kids like marijuana, because it's legalized in so many states now. Not a big deal. Keep it in your locker, worry about it after school, maybe. I mean, that's not the official message, but that's just a kid's kind of thing. But, obviously, cocaine, things, harder drugs and stuff get to be a problem as well. Kids dealing on campus, that's not a good thing. What's going on in that whole scene?
We have drug dogs that search. They pick up. I mean, you know what? Weed is still illegal in North Carolina. You're not supposed to do it. It's not going to be tolerated. So there's pretty low tolerance on all of those things. I think that,
you say you have, how many schools in CMS?
Is it 176 total?
180.
Right.
We added 2 because.
That's right. Sorry, we had new schools.
And how many drug teams would you guess there are?
I don't have the exact number.
We have 3 teams
there we go.
that rotate out, and we do random searches predominantly, in fairness, at 20 high schools. I mean,
And how, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, the kindergarten, when the kindergartners start dealing, we've got a really big problem. But you talk about the high schools, even 23 teams. Are they in the schools all the time randomly, or are they, I don't want to give away the schedule. That doesn't.
We're not going to do that.
But
They have ramped up. They have doubled the number of random searches since the beginning of the year. I spoke to somebody in that department yesterday just to kind of just before today, I wanted to make sure I had my numbers right. I said, are we doubling them up at every school? And because you don't want to talk about this whole targeting thing, but
Sure.
they are doing them more prevalently in schools that have had gun and violence issues. So those schools are seeing an uptick in the number of random searches that are happening.
All right, so take me through the other side of this coin, which is making the news, and not in good ways, but sexual assaults on campus, on school campuses. What's the word? What's going on? Is it more prevalent in the past, or are we just hearing about it more now? We've read in the paper, and we know the news and the media is absolutely 100% accurate all the time. But this dispute about, well, they're not giving a fair opportunity, they're being victimized, the victim being not treated fairly, the families hollering. Can you just walk us through and update us?
So I don't remember the year, but we have been working with the Office of Civil Rights on our Title IX procedures and policies. Our current program that we have is compliant with them. Have there been mistakes made in the past? Yes. Have they led to lawsuits? Yes. Some of the lawsuits are settled, and that's one of the young ladies that speaks out quite a bit. I will say that the meeting a couple meetings ago, she said, I just feel like nobody has heard me because you don't ever call me back. Well, you sued us. So that's sort of a weird situation. But you know what I did? I threw caution to the wind, and I reached out to her and I said, I hear you. I appreciate your being so public, and I care about where you are right now, and things are happening. So there's been some definite situations that we're seeing a lot of in the media. Those were several of them that were several years ago.
I do think Rhonda made a great point there that I think I want to highlight, because there's been a lot of comments and suggestions in the media and by some parties that aren't involved, not the students or not anything else, but external parties or experts in the community who have no knowledge of what we're doing at CMS. We had a 2014 settlement agreement with the Office of Civil Rights. The Office of Civil Rights is a regulatory agency that oversees Title IX, which is the federal program. We have to follow that OCR consent decree. We have no choice. Going to Rhonda's point, have we, is everything ever always gone perfect? Certainly not. But the argument, well, they can't do it this way, they're supposed to do it that way. We have a set of rules that we have an agreement with the federal government that we have to follow, and we do follow that.
And Charlie, can you share just highlight what the basic steps, the rules that must be followed are?
Yeah, ultimately, it gets complicated because there's Title IX has varying differences, and there's different. Rhonda,
well, there's the student facing part, there's staff facing part. Basically, Jeff, each school has a Title IX officer or Title IX coordinator.
Universities, all of them do.
The schools, every school has
every
one.
school, every level.
So when a complaint is made to someone on staff, there's also training that has to happen for staff the beginning of every year. We ramped it up this year because we want it to be a lot more intensive and more intentional. At that point, then there's also an office of civil, or a Title IX office within central office. So there's coordination then with those site coordinators about how things are supposed to happen. Now, is that everyone, all of those people that we just said are human, and that's sometimes where things don't go the way they should necessarily. Can there be things tightened up? Can there be additional training? Can there be better communication? Can there be maybe more of a central office? And then I think this is one of the things that's kind of being talked about right now, and we're talking to OCR. Can we have more central office reach to the schools so that we make sure that those different site coordinators are following the rules as precisely as possible? Yes. Have there been mistakes made? Absolutely. It's deeply troubling as a parent that there have been mistakes made. Have we had people that set us up for lawsuits as a board member? That's a big problem for me. The victims are a big concern, but then that it puts us at risk. So everybody needs to be following the rules and doing their best. But we have a set of pretty strong guidelines for the last 7 years.
Help me and help everyone following along. As an example, most all universities have their own campus police. One of the issues I was dealing with sexual assault on campuses. They get dealt with by the internal police. It's never reported externally. Nobody gets involved. And there's always a perception of lack of transparency and protecting the university's image and how they guide and deal with those issues. Not necessarily true, but you still get that perception if you're not reporting it externally. You mentioned on the guns, you report to local law enforcement. A lot of people listening along, and you mentioned the drug dogs, a lot of people may not be aware that CMS has its own police force. I think one of only 5 of the 115 LEAs across the entire state. Why? I guess a couple tangential questions if we can think about it. Why does CMS have a police force and most schools don't? And with sexual assault and those things, are you dual reporting to CMS internal police and then local law enforcement, CMPD, the sheriff's office? Or what's the sequence of how that all works in that communication and cooperation across those law enforcement agents? Because the CMS police is not like just guys who volunteer. They're full law enforcement police department, correct?
Most of them are retired from local law enforcement and they join us, or they come from the military. So we do have our own police. Part of the reason I think that that's a great idea, and I really wish their scope was expanded and the amount of work that they do, but they do serve as SROs in many of our schools that don't have or additional backup. We had somebody that was a specialist in cyber type stuff, and so he was always on the go looking for cyber threats. We live in a big county and we have multiple jurisdictions, and so CMSPD is a consistency across all of our schools. But as far as the other question, yes, if there is an incident that is reported, it is reported to the local authorities as well as the internal. So, Huntersville PD or Cornelius PD, there was a threat by a student on a bus at one of our local schools the other day. There was a video of it that was turned over to the local police to investigate, but simultaneously CMS police is actually looking at it as well and looking at commonalities. We've had instances where the local police said, you know what, that's kind of a school specialized thing. Why don't you handle it and just keep us in the loop? But the arrests and that kind of thing are always made by the local authority.
Okay.
Rhonda, I want to transition a little bit if I could. Yesterday, Huntersville Mayor Melinda Bales and I and John Anarella and Ryan McDaniels all went to Ceratec's Multicom and recognized them with their Inspire Our Future Award for the involvement they've had with our education collaborative. Our teachers, not just the students that are touring some of our manufacturing and industries up here, it's the teachers understanding what skill set is needed to provide in the schools. In 3 weeks at Huff High School, we're going to have some of our entrepreneurs judging some of the students' works that they're putting together for their businesses. Since we have a lot of small businesses that will probably view this, how can the small business owners get involved with our public school system and help out?
Well, I think the biggest thing they should do is get involved with the Lake Norman Education Collaborative. I think that's a great gateway to kind of coordinate things. I know that they just had an event, I think it was yesterday at Huff, for alumni students to come, students from colleges and high schools to come and talk to their kids. We're just getting back to where all that can happen again inside the schools. We really, and so there's a couple things, that's one of them. I think that reaching out to you guys are a great gateway to help that, coordinate that to happen. If nothing else, reach out to me and I'll connect you with the high schools or with the middle schools. I mean, I think that you've got to start the CTE and career focus in middle schools to get kids engaged so that they realize that, hey, I may not be the best student right now, but if I do a little bit better, I could get into this kind of program and end up with a great career. The career paths can be so varied right now, and we've got some great ones. I will just toot our horn up here. Our work with career technical education through the Lake Norman Education Collaborative with our local schools is an example that everybody else across the county wishes they had. We've got some amazing things, and it's really because of the passion of this organization. Started back when it was just the Huntersville group with Melinda Bales and Carrie Kester Warren.
And Mayor Bales had to jump off this because she and Ryan are planning, along with the chamber, our next speed networking event that took place a couple of months ago. Jeff, we're coming up against the hour. I want to recognize Lee Blakely, who's on the call as well. Lee, you've got an important program coming up next month in one of our schools. Can you share a little bit about what you're doing?
Absolutely, Bill. I appreciate the opportunity, and Rhonda for your service, Charlie, Jeff for your really good questions during this process or this conversation. We've got an event coming up on January 30th from 1 to 5 p.m. on Sunday afternoon at Woodlawn School, which is just a mile north of Davidson. It's called STEAM Fest, and we'll have over 50 hands-on activity booths created by local universities, libraries, businesses, museums, clubs that relate to science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. Kids from the community, families can come to the event. It's completely free. They can come in, they can play for the afternoon, get a chance to be exposed to all these different, just interesting and fun activities. And we're just looking for every opportunity to get the word out to the community, and also for the small business community who may be watching from this local area. We're looking for sponsors and both for booths and from a marketing viewpoint to help make the event as strong as possible. Our URL is wsteamfest.org. If anybody's interested, we'd love to talk with you. Thank you.
And Lee, we'll get
Rhonda, one thing,
Bill,
before we close with Rhonda, it's kind of last comment for you, kind of giving you the last word. Is anything you want us to know about CMS that we might not know, or any just last closing thoughts you wanted to share?
In my opinion, CMS is an amazing place to attend. We provide so many amazing opportunities for our students to grow and to carry forward and to become our future leaders. And a lot of that is overshadowed by a lot of the negativity that's out there. But I urge you to get involved and actually see what's going on. I think being involved in the schools will actually change how you feel about them.
Well, again, we appreciate what you've done for us, rolling up your sleeves all these years and the effort and time. And again, getting to know the parents, the teachers, the administrators, the folks in the community, and that you are plugged in and well respected. And again, thank you for your service and willingness to do this during some pretty tough times. So Bill, I'm going to throw it back to you for any closing.
Well, and Jeff, thank you for the job you've done this year on Focus Friday. We've had a variety of speakers, and I know you and I have talked about getting out a little legislative update to our membership about what are some of the things that we've covered this year, what are some of the things that we're looking at in 2022. But do you want to share anything about who you have online for maybe the program in January, February?
Well, January, it looks like we're going to have Trey Rabin. Trey is the president of AT&T. For North Carolina, and talk about a lot of the regulatory impacts on communications and what we're doing in that whole sphere. So that's the next person that's up.
We're also working together to put together another healthcare summit. We had that event back in 2018, 2019. It was well received. We had Lake Norman Regional Medical Center. We had Novant. We had Atrium all together sharing some information. So we're working to put that program together in February. So that's going to be a very interesting program. Well, thank you, Rhonda, again, and Charlie, Lee, Jeff, for everything you've done this year, putting these programs together. Want to also remind everybody that Novant Health is our presenting sponsor of this program, and we couldn't do it without them. I hope everybody has a fantastic weekend and Merry Christmas. Happy holidays.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll come back anytime you need me.
All right. Thanks, Rhonda. Bye, guys.